Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully this will be a fairly quick introduction into a project that I've been working on over the last 18 months or so. And this is work in progress. It's not complete. And before I start with the actual details, I just thought I'd quickly talk about the complexity of recording in the London area, because it is rather complicated compared to the rest of the country, in that we've got the modern boundary here of Greater London as it is in red, and that is overlying the Vice County system as well, which you're all familiar with. This is my Vice County, Middlesex, just here, Surrey, Kent, South Essex, Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire. But we then have overlying that the London Natural History Society circle or polygon, and then also the interaction with the various biological record centres in the region. So it makes for some quite complicated data flow issues at times, and we're trying to resolve those. Sorry? Probably, yes.
Not now, I don't make no Essex.
Oh, yes, I don't know how that got missed out. That's very curious. I didn't draw that diagram. It's not my fault. Blame Giggle, it's their fault. But it's a really nice diagram. Apart from that, I thought you weren't going to notice. The other thing I want to say, obviously, this is my talk, but this talk I really couldn't have done without the help of our local biological records centre. They've done some of the data crunching for me. And of course, BSBI volunteers and LNHS. You're making me laugh now. So for those of you like Giggle, Giggle stands for Green Space Information for Greater London. It's our local records centre. So without the voluntary activities and members of the LNHS and the BSBI, I wouldn't be standing here talking about all of this data. I've got this working correct, not used to it. Is it that one?
It does this sometimes.
Ah, lovely. Now, the other thing I'm just going to say is I don't normally put text-heavy slides up, but I'm feeling a bit brain achy at the moment, so I'll put this up just to remind myself of what I need to talk about. First off is really the rationale for this project. Why am I doing and what are my aims? You know, first and foremost is actually that London's biodiversity, like many other parts of the country, is in serious decline. We have major problems in our biodiversity. And the Greater London Authority, which oversits the various London boroughs, has the kind of leading drive in many ways for biodiversity conservation in the Greater London. And it's not doing a brilliant job. And I suspect many of you are very familiar with various kind of pieces of legislation we around to have biodiversity, nature and conservation. Many areas should have, for example, species of conservation concerns list, which are linked to, amongst other things, the NERC Act and Schedule 41. And these are species and habitats which should be of material concern and relevance in planning, etc., etc. And it's fair to say in the Greater London area, many of these species and many of these habitats are almost entirely ignored despite their obligations under various pieces of planning law. And as an example of that is actually the poor quality of Greater London's current species of conservation concern list for vascular plants. It numbers some 60-odd species, of which 3 have never been known to have been recorded in the Greater London area in the last 300 years. They just happen to be nice, pretty things that they've heard about. About another 25 to 30 have been extinct in Greater London for between 50 and 100 years or more. So there are only actually about 27 species in the GLA's current vascular plants which are actually relevant to the GLA landscape and environment as things stand, which is a little bit concerning. And even those, such as copse bindweed, one of my favourite plants, is ignored. So part of what I'm doing is actually about trying to drive some change by producing a robust data set and twisting the arm of the GLA to start using it and working with the Biological Record Centre to ensure that developers and land managers and everybody actually look at these lists. The other thing I've actually tried to do with this project is to incorporate threat statuses. Because often it's not, you know, local red lists, we use rare, scarce, etc., etc. And I've made the decision I'm going to use the 2 sets of information in parallel, because I think one of the things that is actually really critically important, particularly in many local authorities and planning organisations, they understand to varying degrees the language of threat. It reads to them more. So if you say to somebody, it's rare, and they're working in the planning office, like, meh. If you say, it's critically endangered, their ears lift up a little bit and they respond and they think about it more. So I'm trying to do not as a robust an analysis as the GB lists or the England list for the vascular plants. It's going to be a little bit more quick and dirty, frankly. I will put that into the documentation. An attempt to actually create some kind of rationale around risk. And the other thing, actually, I momentarily talked to somebody about this earlier on. I would be really interested, you know, in many ways, our data sets that we've used are 1960s and later for many, many taxa in Britain. In many ways, for many species, the large-scale loss for those species happened before that. So we're missing the front portion of the curve of loss, which I think is a very, very important issue for us as a community of natural historians and botanists and people who care about our environment. And I would really love to find a way, I don't know how we can do it, of actually taking those qualitative pieces of information that we find in early floras, such as rare or common in the district and things like that, and turning it into some sort of hierarchical scaling that can be calibrated in some way with the various forms of distributional data that we use today. I don't know whether it's possible, but it would be really great to think about ways of doing that. I'm not going to attempt that in this current project. And as I say, I want to actually produce a tool in the form of an Axiophyte list, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. And the rare plant list is a tool for local authorities, land managers and planning schemes, that should be schemes, that's planning schemes and site designs. And these are hopefully will use alongside a revised invasive species list for the Greater London area. So I actually work also in our local invasive species initiatives as well in the Greater London area. And I'm using it more selfishly and centrally for actually kickstarting me to actually start writing species accounts for the next flora of London, which I'm responsible for corralling the data on, as the last one was published in 1983. And essentially based upon data from the 60s into the mid-70s. So it has been quite a while now since we've had an up-to-date flora. And it's fair to say that London flora is changing at a greater rate than probably pretty much anywhere else in Britain, I would say. One of the things that's really come out of this work and that I've been doing and other people are working on is actually a realization that certain parts of Greater London are considerably more important than other parts of Greater London for plant diversity. On one level, we knew that, you think, oh, that site's really great, but it's become really, really stark through this process that certain areas are very, very important. So I'm hoping to maybe make some form of adaptation on an important plant area thing for the Greater London area, which will highlight, in particular, the London Borough of Richmond as being incredibly important for rare and vulnerable plants in the London area, particularly species which need low nutrient environments because of the large scale pieces of landscape such as Wimbledon Common and Richmond Park, which actually are massive refuges for vulnerable plants in London. And actually they are still relatively under-recorded. So if you want to do some really exciting recording in the London area of London rare plants, head to that part of the city. It would be great. Other notable areas actually are the Croydon area, because it's the sort of key rump of our calcareous source, because much of London is neutral to acid, and the Thames Gateway area coming out into Essex and North Kent. Those are also fundamentally important to London's plant life. So here's the headline news from the red listing assessment that we've done. I've assessed round about just under 1,500 to 1,050 taxa, including segregate. I've actually done section and series levels for certain things like Taraxacum and Rubus as well. So, for example, Rubus sexprengelii is going to become actually an Axiophyte for London because it's restricted to several kind of rare and unusual woodland habitats in the area. As you can imagine, we've not assessed the hyperabundant and successful non-native species such as Coniza sumatrensis, or the natives such as Poa annua. So, but it's been a long list of taxa that we've identified for both projects running parallel. And it's pretty dreadful. We know that extinction risks in Britain are really bad, but London, it's fair to say, when you put all the data from the various vice counties, and I'm still doing a bit of tidying clear, approximately 187 species have become extinct in Greater London over the last 200 to 300 years, which I would say probably pretty much puts it up there, along with maybe Cambridgeshire as up as one of the most significant species losses. Sorry? And Northamptonshire as well. That's one of my home counties as well, also pretty dreadful. So 187 completely lost. Then there's about 15 species which are essentially regionally extirpated or extinct, but they're those ones where you're like, is this an escaped garden plant? Is it one of these cutesy arable things, you know, the cornflowers, wildflower seed mixes and stuff like that? So there's a cohort of about 15 where their status is deeply questionable as well. Then going further down, of the various species at a GB and England level that have been assessed nationally at near threatened or above, but principally above, there are another 156 species or so in the London area which are at risk. And actually, one of the things that's true about this in general is if it's got a GB status of, say, or England status of, say, vulnerable, often as not in London, because of the fragmented state of London as a whole, it's usually endangered or critically endangered. It's usually a scale up or two. And then finally, even for the so-called least concerns, we're finding many of these least concerned species are really down, in many cases, to their last 4 or 5 sites in London and are really, really in trouble. So what we're finding is essentially actually pretty much a large scale, particularly in central London, large scale replacement of our native and Archaeophyte taxa with successful kind of nitrophiles that have been around for a long time, as well as new cohorts of neophytes. So we're seeing some massive change. And just to sort of go through a few pretty pictures and talk about, this is Myanthema bifolium, the May lily, which is one of these species which was lost in the 19th century and then reappeared, possibly planted in the early 20th century from Hampstead Heath, where's the place where it was first recorded in Britain. It's got a very questionable status in the Hampstead area and is then known for. So, but he's essentially now is recorded as regionally extinct with a little bit of a question mark. I just picked one or two, partly because these are the images I had put available on my phone really quickly, because then there's a bit of a hurry. Umbilicus rupestris is quite an interesting one, because many of the species which are associated with wars, such as the aspleniums, are generally doing very well. Most asplenium species are actually having a pretty good time. Umbilicus is a curious, it's been very rare, has gone through a period of expansion, probably associated with climate change and global warming, where it has become locally established in the London area. But it seems to have stabilized, stopped, or maybe retrenching. Something seems to be happening it's not doing. So I've actually, there's about 10 sites. It's on the, so I've given it at the moment, and I'm not sure whether it's going to be correct, a near threatened status. But parallel to this, it is actually coming up as an Axiophyte through the separate analysis, which I'll talk about in a minute, as a Axiophyte for vegetated walls, which we're picking up as a key habitat in the London area. And then one of my pet and most beloved plants, Sonchus palustris. It was very nice to see the other big two in terms of the big blousy dandelion-y type things of east of Britain being sown earlier on through Alex's talk. Is very, very nice. London area, Sonchus palustris, unlike the rest of Britain, where Sonchus palustris seems to be doing relatively well, particularly Cambridgeshire, the picture on the River Thames is pretty bad. So even though it's despite being least concern, London, I've put it vulnerable. I may well bump it up. And VC21 is regionally extinct. It's completely lost in my county. The last truly wild population on the edge of London was destroyed by persons unknown in about 2006. Unfortunately, I foresaw destruction coming and I rescued seed. and we now have 1 or 2 re-established populations in the Greater London area. But in all, well, certainly in the main case, that site is actually at risk of development. So we could well lose this species entirely from Greater London as things stand. So this may well go up. And again, I've given it, it's been linked with that as an Axiophyte to rivers. Other plants, I put this in because I love Saxifraga granulata. It's strongly associated with my child, but it's an exemplar of actually in many cases how many, oh, look at me, I've left out his tongue further. You can tell how quickly I was typing and editing in the back. Not add its tongue further. You're going to see what that's going to be in a minute. This is a species which in many parts of the country is not considered at risk. It's less common, maybe more localized, but appears to have gone through a pretty calamitous collapse in its distribution in London. If it wasn't actually for the Richmond area, I would probably be listing as critically endangered. There are about 4 or 5 sites in the Richmond area, and that is about it, apart from 1 or 2 others, one of which may well be a recent introduction courtesy of the Olympics development site. So this is a species which is in real trouble, but is making it onto our Axiophyte list as well. So now going to talk about Axiophytes, because Elena particularly wanted this, so I've been a good boy to focus on this a little bit more for you. And this was work that was not really done by me. This was done by Paul Lossi and Julia Faheche, and they worked together on this. So I'll just give a quick summary of what they did. They worked alongside with our Biological Records Centre, who provided them with data on all of the 6,000 or 7,000 taxa that are vascular plants that have been recorded in the Greater London area, most of which are essentially short-term garden escapes, and actually excluded a range of taxa which were part of that cohort and retained species that were in 25% or less of the monads in London area. What they did on top of that was they actually then overlaid that distributional data with the distribution of sink sites in the London, which are sites of importance for nature conservation. So they did an analysis of the actual species and their kind of and how they related to those habitats, and from that coincidence mapping essentially designated the kind of what habitats they'd be Axiophytes for. We're just going through the process of editing and tidying up that data for that activity, but there are going to be about 700 Axiophyte species for the Greater London area, which is quite a lot. And I reckon we might narrow it down. We just say this is work in progress. I think once we've got the kind of finalized list for each species, I'm probably going to wield the axe on some of them. But one of the things that we have included in there, which in many is not included, are various things around brownfield habitats as well. So this is work in progress. But the other thing is really challenging, as I mentioned up here in London area, is really difficult with certain species which are clearly axiophytic in other parts of the world, such as Caltha palustris or maybe Nymphea alba, to actually work out what their status in London. In most cases, species like that are actually reintroductions or planting. In fact, actually, in the case of Nymphea alba, subspecies alba, I'm actually really concerned about its status in the Greater London area. I think it is massively over-recorded for the garden hybrids, and I think is going through a pretty calamitous collapse in its populations. And I think it is a species that we need to look at. And I suspect maybe nationally as well. Yeah. I think it really is being massively over-recorded for these hybrids. Is almost, I mean, historically, it was known to grow all along the River Thames through central London. 400 years ago, you'd have rode along the River Thames and there'd have been white water lilies in front of Fulham Palace and the Palace of Westminster and places like that, all along. So just quickly, just some things. So the team, and not me, they then actually scrutinized the data, as I said, to really critically analyze the coincidence between these proposed species that I want to use as Axiophytes and aligned them up against the various designations. So local sites, boroughs, borough grade 1, borough grade 2, metropolitan sites, and triple SIs. And often there's a strong coincidence between triple SIs and our metropolitan site. London has a slightly quirky system compared to other parts of the country for designating sites of importance for nature. But overall, so I won't go through the data, it's a fairly clear thing that actually their analysis has actually picked out the right species, and they're still working on tidying up that data. So I'm just going to talk about one or two other fun things to go along and about the complexity of deciding what to do. I've talked to quite a few people over the last day or so about how Mediterranean species are becoming really successful in the London area, particularly these wintergreen annuals. Many of you will have seen through BSBI news things like Mediterranean nettle and Urtica membranacea, and also things like Fumaria capreolata, subspecies of capreolata, coming in through this global trade in horticultural plants, etc., etc. Those are pretty clear, you know, they're basically neophytes and they're not part of any form of the analysis, and they don't really have strong association with any particular habitat. Plants like common cudweed pose a bit of a head scratcher in the London area because two things seem to be happening. Older populations from old landscape, from arable habitats, thin, nutrient-poor, acid grasslands seem to be going into freefall and dying out. But parallelly, we're having actually fairly consistent reintroductions of this species into the Greater London area through the horticultural trade. So 10 years ago, I'd probably said it was on the brink of extinction in London. It's now following Jersey cudweed, a story that we all know very, very well, in becoming more established as an urban plant. So this is a species where its status is a bit like, whoa, what are we going to do with that? And then just another example of actually how, no, you've got Addiston Fern this time, got it right. Of actually how, again, a nationally fairly widespread species is doing terribly in the London area. And probably in the case of this species, so at least concerned nationally, I would say in London it's essentially near threatened. If it wasn't for Croydon and one or two other areas on the periphery of London where there are still decent populations in some old pieces of grassland, it would be going much higher. In my vice county, Middlesex, it may, it's probably underrecorded, it is a little bit, but you know, it's very distinctive and people go out. It seems to be heading towards extinction. One of the last known sites for it, somebody said they've not seen it there for many years. And I think it is definitely going into a very, very bad place in Greater London. And again, we have very clearly picked this as an Axiophyte for lowland meadows in Greater London. And then nearly there, just one or two more. I just wanted to talk about London rocket, because this is one of my pet favourite plants. I think increasingly, like a lot of these other Mediterranean ecosystem annuals, it's no longer particularly London, but I'll still retain it as ours. And we've broken the rules with this species because we're going to give it an axiophytic status because it is culturally, you know, really strongly associated with the city. It has a story to tell for our society. And it's really interesting because you'll notice very cheekily, I'll put a question mark behind the neophyte, because I'm not convinced, I have no clear evidence that it is necessarily a neophyte, certainly in the London area. Partly, you know, it's got that early, and I wish David Pearman was here so we could have an argy-bargy about it. But actually, there are two colour forms in Greater London in the populations, which is quite interesting. On the right, you'll see there's a pale lemony yellow one. That's the nouveau version, as far as I'm calling it. And that seems to be largely associated with the areas outside of the original City of London and the immediate part of Roman London and areas like that. And it's patchily distributed in parts of Islington, where I live, and other parts of London. The one on the left, the one with the darker, more chromy yellow flower, seems to be strongly associated with the remnants of ancient London. You will often find it, for example, growing near bits of Roman wall, the bits that stick out there in the City of London, or in this particular case, this is actually on the Hertford Union Canal, which is a really fascinating site, which joins the River Lee with the Regents. And the bridge that joins the two sites is an extraordinary bridge because it's very old, you know, it's an Industrial Revolution era, but it's partly made up with Roman limestone blocks. So it's a really funky, peculiar hybrid bridge in its own right, and it has an amazing population of this species. So I'm kind of got this little thing that maybe this is archaeophytic actually in the London area. I can't prove it, it's just my gut feeling, but it's not been assessed from risk because at the moment, frankly, it's also doing quite well. It's increasing. And then, very nice rosette for you, if you would like that. Just very finally, as one of London's most, we tend to think of London as being peripheral to kind of rare plants and important populations. This population to right is global. Do you remember going and seeing that, Fred? Yeah, at Stainsmore. Probably one of the most, probably in the top 3 or 4 most important sites for this species in London. That population it's the only population bar one that was recently discovered for the whole of Greater London. So for London, we now have 2 sites for this. The other one is at Lesnes Abbey Wood, where it was discovered about 4 or 5 years ago, and the one at Staines in the West London. But in both cases, they're on such small areas of landscape that actually potentially if things go wrong, this species could be lost from Greater London. So I've given it a critically endangered potentially because it's tiddly. And it's got a kind of interesting mélange of brownfield and acid grassland habitat kind of Axiophyte designation. I've got a big boring spreadsheet if anybody comes to have a look at it with me later on. But I think that's enough for the time being. Thank you.
I think you're working on something that's very similar to what I've done for Cambridgeshire with my Register of Plants and Conservation Concern.
Yeah.
Which includes all these locally threatened characters.
Yeah.
Plus all the IUCN near threatened and above.
So one of the things that we aim to do is after the spreadsheet, which we will then put into the DDB, so it's nicely stored away and then update it, is we actually want to just produce some Word documents which are of use to the local authorities, etc., so they can actually helpfully push a little bit of informed planning decision making.
I think I've almost got my local wildlife trust who makes use of this for site surveys using my register, so they are taking note. I think the more people that sort of push in that direction, the more likely it is to be adopted more nationally across the board. And I found it didn't take much time to put together a basic list, because you just fling a few questions at the DDB and it spits them all out. The harder bit is doing your local list, and even that is relatively straightforward if you just split DDB records into 2 categories, the last 20 years and 20 years previous. And
yes, we've had the problem at the moment in London where not all the data is in single place. So there's been a bit of flip-flopping between data sources. Hopefully, as we get better at data management, those things will get easier in the future.
Anybody else got? Yes,
Comment really, just since we did the floor of Inner Dublin, I've always liked, ruderals and that. But the Sicimbrium, the umbilicus are interesting because, as I was saying, the Sicimbrium area used to be quite common in Galway.
Oh, in Galway? Oh,
Yeah,
that's
not
interesting.
so much in Dublin.
Yeah.
And now they've started cleaning the city, so it's disappearing. But without having any knowledge about it, I would think it's quite an ancient medieval thing. And the umbilicus is associated with medieval castles.
Yes.
Because it doesn't occur really in lowland Galway, it occurs up on the sandstones.
Yeah.
But I have it in my world because it's a medieval castle just full of it, and it's a herb.
Yeah. Umbilicus is.
Now I don't know, but that's, I'd say, another.
Data seems to suggest that umbilicus in southern England is gradually moving further north and further east. So in my kind of home county, Northamptonshire edge, my village Eden was, along with Cannons Ashby, was pretty much on the eastern boundary of it in the Midlands, and it's crept east. I mean, you could make the argument at some level that you could actually consider these things non-native in these areas, that actually they've really been driven by highly anthropogenic habitats that have been created through building walls. It's kind of maybe a fine-grained kind of view on it. But one of the things I think is also happening, I've talked about climate change with these species. These wintergreen annuals, I think they're also interacting with weed killers. I think there's some really interesting dynamic and complex things happening with weed killer use in urban areas. And I mentioned to several people about how another saxifrage, Saxifraga tridactylites, 15, 20 years ago, I thought was going to become extinct in London. We were down to about 5 sites and we took like about 10, 15 plants on each. And then bang, we've got dozens of sites with millions of plants in some areas. And you can have some of it, but climate change doesn't work because we know it's well established as a widespread native plant in northern Britain. The most parsimonious explanation, particularly in terms of where it first started becoming really abundant, which was on railway clinker and places like that on the approaches to train stations. And I think some of these wintergreen, we've seen similar things with Arabidopsis, Arophila verna, and a couple of others. that seem to, and Canizosuma trensis almost certainly, I think, are actually developing glyphosate resistance, which should be a matter of national interest in questioning.
Villagers has turned up in Southend.
Yeah.
And it's spreading like mad down a brick line, little brick.
Yeah. And actually that picture was actually not from London, that was actually from North Kent. So yeah, that one. So it's definitely moving. Sorry, Helene.
Do you know that they continue to use glyphosate in the same way over the last few years, or is that losing option?
It's a bit patchy. So, but some areas, yes. So one area, some boroughs love a bit of glyphosate. Again, you tend to find the politics and the culture as the London boroughs are very different. Hackney, for example, is being terribly nouveau in Hackney and actually moving into novel tree species and reducing weed killer or banning it. Other boroughs are going out. But one of the things that just anecdotally, I've seen, for example, curbs weed killered, Saxifraga granulata just stood in the middle of it going, oh, what was that? Thanks for that extra bit of water. So I think, yeah, I mean, it's anecdotal and observational, but it should be a research question, you know, because yeah, but London is still quite widespread. It dropped a little bit because of COVID, but there's not really any coincidence with the COVID thing. It was happening before COVID. And as I say, quite a lot of London boroughs still use it like it's going out of fashion. Yes.
Will you retain your link between the habitat for your Axiophyte list and the species? And the reason I'm asking is that I've found that that's useful. You can take a species list and work back to predicting what the habitat would be like. I'm gonna
thinking about how we're actually going to present the data so it's useful. I mean, the raw data in the spreadsheet is the raw data in the spreadsheet, but presentationally kind of putting it in such a way that can be used. One of the things I'm probably going to do is actually quarter London, so we can say that these Axiophytes for southwest London are these species in these woodlands. Not quite got there in the thinking process about how we're going to address those kind of things and make sure they're accessible and stuff like that. In terms of actually going back and doing more field research and data, was that your question? For the time being, my priority is to start writing the accounts for the flora, because it's just such a massive task. And actually, probably the next thing I'm going to start saying to botanists in London is these species which we have red listed, we need to go out and just check the sites again. Because I think, you know, as Alex was talking earlier, I would like to next see some form of fun, sort of flora guardianship type program going on in London's, because we've got nothing at the moment. There's no safety net for London's rare and vulnerable plant species. The Sonchus palustris example I talked about, which was myself and another guy, is an almost unique event. In most other cases, even things like Heliosciadum repens, it's been touch and go, hasn't it, Fred? In Walthamstow Marsh's site, about actually its virability. So I think the priorities are getting more data on rare things, really sorting out actually how rare they are, and then actually cracking the whip with the local authorities. That will be my priority.
Thank you, Mark.